The future does not exist, yet many people spend their lives fearing it. Namo Amitabha Buddha. The fear of the unknown expanded approximately 800 words. Human beings naturally fear uncertainty. Throughout history, survival depended on the ability to anticipate danger. The mind learned to imagine future possibilities in order to protect the body. In ancient times, this ability was essential. It allowed early humans to sense potential threats, to prepare for harsh conditions, and to avoid situations that could lead to harm. The mind became a tool for prediction, constantly scanning the environment for signs of danger. But in modern life, this ancient survival mechanism often creates suffering rather than safety. The world we live in today is very different. Most of the threats we face are no longer immediate or physical. They are subtle, psychological, and often uncertain. Yet the mind continues to operate as if danger is always near. Instead of protecting us from real threats, the mind begins creating imaginary problems. It constructs scenarios that have not happened and may never happen. It fills the future with possibilities that are not grounded in reality. It asks questions that cannot be answered. What if something goes wrong? What if I fail? What if everything changes? These questions appear simple, but they carry a deep emotional weight. Each one opens the door to countless imagined outcomes. The mind begins to build stories. In one moment, it imagines failure. In another, it imagines loss. Then it imagines rejection, disappointment, or regret. None of these events are happening in the present moment. Yet the body reacts as if they are real. The heart rate increases. The breath becomes shallow. A sense of tension appears in the chest or the stomach. All of this arises from thoughts about a future that does not yet exist. These questions pull the mind away from the present moment and into an imagined future. And the more time the mind spends in this imagined space, the more convincing it becomes. The future begins to feel real, even though it is only a mental projection. And because the future cannot be controlled, fear appears. This is the key point. The mind seeks control. It wants certainty. It wants guarantees. But the nature of life does not allow for complete control. Everything is constantly changing. Outcomes cannot be fully predicted. So when the mind tries to control what cannot be controlled, it creates tension. That tension is experienced as fear. The more the mind tries to solve uncertainty, the deeper it becomes trapped in it. It searches for answers that do not exist. It tries to prepare for every possible outcome. It attempts to eliminate risk completely. But this effort is endless, because for every imagined solution, a new imagined problem appears. This cycle continues again and again, creating a loop of mental activity that never truly resolves anything. Over time, this pattern becomes habitual. The mind no longer needs a real reason to worry. It simply continues worrying because it has learned to do so. Fear becomes a background state, quietly influencing thoughts, decisions, and emotions. A person may begin to avoid situations, not because they are dangerous, but because they feel uncertain. They may hesitate to take opportunities, not because they are incapable, but because the mind has imagined possible failure. In this way, the fear of the unknown begins to shape life itself. And yet, if we look closely, we can see something important. All of this fear is based on something that has not happened. It is based on projections, assumptions, and imagined scenarios. The future, in this context, exists only as thought. Still, the emotional impact is real. This is how powerful the mind can be. It can create an experience of fear without any immediate danger. It can turn possibility into anxiety. It can turn uncertainty into suffering. The more the mind tries to control tomorrow, the more anxious it becomes today. Instead of finding peace through control, it finds restlessness. Instead of clarity, it finds confusion. Like instead of safety, it creates its own form of distress. And so the very mechanism that once helped humans survive now becomes a source of inner struggle. The mind is not wrong for trying to protect us, but without awareness, it does not know when to stop. It continues generating thoughts, scenarios, and possibilities, even when they are no longer helpful. Understanding this process is the first step toward freedom. When we begin to see how the mind creates fear from the unknown, we create a small distance between ourselves and our thoughts. We begin to realize that not every thought represents reality. Not every possibility needs to be believed, and not every imagined future needs to be feared. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Anxiety about tomorrow, approximately 800 words. When fear of the future grows stronger, anxiety becomes a constant companion. It does not always appear loudly. Sometimes it is quiet, subtle, almost invisible, but it is always present, lingering beneath the surface of the mind. A person may go through their day appearing calm on the outside, while inside, the mind continues to generate worry after worry. Anxiety often becomes most noticeable at night. When the body becomes still, when distractions fade away, the mind begins to speak more clearly. Thoughts that were hidden during the day begin to rise to the surface. A person may lie awake in bed, staring into the darkness, while the mind replays possible futures. They imagine conversations that have not happened. They imagine mistakes that have not been made. They imagine losses that have not occurred. Each imagined situation feels real in that moment. The mind creates detailed scenarios. It fills in the gaps with emotion. It builds a world that does not exist, yet feels completely convincing. And the body responds accordingly. The heart begins to beat faster. The breath becomes shallow. The muscles tighten, even though there is no immediate danger. The body reacts as if there is. This is the nature of anxiety. It is the body responding to imagined threats as if they were real. Over time, this pattern becomes exhausting. The mind continues to move forward into the future, trying to solve problems before they arise. But the more it tries, the more problems it seems to find. A person may begin to feel overwhelmed, not by reality, but by possibility. They are not suffering from what is happening. They are suffering from what might happen. This distinction is important, because when we look closely, we can see that most of the anxiety we experience is not connected to the present moment. In the present moment, there may be no immediate danger. There may be a quiet room. There may be a steady breath. There may be nothing urgent or threatening. And yet, the mind continues to generate stress. This happens because the mind is not resting in the present. It is traveling forward, projecting itself into an uncertain future. And in that imagined space, it tries to gain control. But control is never fully possible, so the mind keeps searching. It keeps analyzing. It keeps asking questions. What if something goes wrong? What if I am not prepared? What if I lose everything? Each question leads to another. Each answer creates more doubt. This cycle becomes self-sustaining. Anxiety feeds on itself. The more we think, the more we worry. The more we worry, the more we think. And slowly, this process begins to drain emotional energy. A person may feel tired even without physical exertion. They may feel restless even in quiet moments. They may feel disconnected even when surrounded by others. This is because the mind is no longer present. It is caught in a continuous loop of anticipation. Instead of experiencing life as it unfolds, the mind becomes trapped in expectation. It waits for problems. It prepares for difficulties. It anticipates loss. And in doing so, it creates a constant state of tension. But there is something important to understand. The future that the mind fears is not real. It is a construction. It is built from memory, imagination, and interpretation. It is influenced by past experiences, by fears, by insecurities. But it is not reality itself. Recognizing this does not immediately remove anxiety, but it begins to loosen its hold. Because once we see that the mind is creating these scenarios, we no longer need to fully believe them. We can begin to question them. We can begin to observe them. And slowly, the intensity of anxiety begins to soften. Namo Amitabha Buddha. The future exists only in the mind, approximately 800 words. The Buddha taught that suffering often arises from misunderstanding the nature of reality. One of the greatest misunderstandings is our relationship with time. We tend to believe that the past, present, and future all exist in the same way. But when we examine closely, this belief begins to change. The past exists only as memory. It cannot be touched. It cannot be changed. It cannot be experienced again directly. What we call the past is a collection of mental images, stored impressions, and interpretations. Even memory itself is not fixed. Each time we recall an event, it may change slightly. It may be influenced by current emotions, by new understanding, by time itself. In this way, the past is not a stable reality. It is a mental reconstruction. The future, in a similar way, exists only as imagination. It has not yet arrived. It has no form. It has no substance. What we call the future is a projection. The mind takes fragments from the past and rearranges them into possibilities. It creates images of what might happen. But these images are not reality. They are thoughts, and thoughts are temporary. They arise and disappear continuously. The only moment that truly exists is the present moment. This moment, right now, is the only place where life is actually happening. It is where we breathe. It is where we feel. It is where we experience. And yet, the mind spends most of its time elsewhere. It moves back into memory. It moves forward into imagination. Rarely does it remain fully here. This movement creates a sense of instability. Because when the mind is not grounded in the present, it becomes influenced by things that are not real. It reacts to memory as if it were happening again. It reacts to imagination as if it were already real. This is how suffering arises, not from reality itself, but from misunderstanding it. When we recognize that the future is a mental projection rather than a concrete reality, something begins to shift. The mind starts to relax. It no longer needs to control something that does not yet exist. It no longer needs to solve problems that have not appeared. Instead, it can return to what is real, to what is present. This does not mean we ignore the future completely. Planning still has its place. Preparation still has value. But there is a difference between practical planning and psychological fear. Planning is intentional. It is grounded. It is limited. Fear, on the other hand, is repetitive. It is uncontrolled. It is endless. When we confuse these two, we begin to suffer. We believe that worrying is necessary. We believe that anxiety is helpful. But in reality, it often creates more confusion than clarity. Understanding this distinction allows us to relate to the future in a healthier way. We can prepare when necessary. We can act when needed. But we do not need to live in constant fear of what has not yet happened. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Returning to the present. Approximately 800 words. Mindfulness is the practice of returning attention to the present moment. It is simple but not always easy, because the mind has been conditioned to move constantly. It jumps from one thought to another, from one memory to another, from one imagined future to another. Mindfulness invites the mind to pause, to stop chasing, to simply observe. When we bring attention to the breath, something begins to change. The breath is always present. It does not belong to the past. It does not belong to the future. It exists only now. By focusing on breathing, we anchor the mind in reality. We give it something stable to return to. At first, the mind may resist. It may continue producing thoughts. It may become restless. It may feel uncomfortable. This is natural. The mind is not used to stillness, but with patience, something begins to shift. We start noticing thoughts as they arise. Instead of being pulled into them, we observe them. We see how a thought appears, stays for a moment, and then disappears. We see how quickly the mind changes. This observation creates space, and in that space, there is freedom. We no longer need to follow every thought. We no longer need to believe every fear. We can simply watch. Mindfulness does not mean stopping thoughts completely. It means changing our relationship with them. Instead of being controlled by thoughts, we become aware of them. This awareness weakens their power. A fearful thought may still arise, but instead of becoming overwhelmed, we recognize it as just a thought. It comes. It stays briefly. It passes. Through this process, the mind begins to calm, not because we forced it to be quiet, but because we stopped feeding it with constant attention. Gradually, the space between thoughts becomes more noticeable. Moments of silence begin to appear, and within that silence there is peace. A simple, quiet peace that does not depend on external conditions. This peace has always been present. It was simply hidden beneath layers of mental activity. As we return to the present again and again, this peace becomes more stable, more accessible, more natural. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Trusting the flow of life. Approximately 800 words. When we stop fearing the future, something remarkable happens. The present moment becomes clearer. It feels lighter, more open, more alive. We begin to notice details that were previously ignored. The sound of the wind, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of our own breathing. These simple experiences were always there, but they were overshadowed by the noise of constant thinking. As the mind becomes quieter, life becomes richer. We experience conversations more deeply. We listen more fully. We respond more naturally. There is less tension, less urgency, less need to control everything. Instead of trying to predict every outcome, we begin to trust the process of life itself. This does not mean becoming passive or careless. It means recognizing that not everything needs to be controlled. There is a natural flow to life. Events arise, situations change, experiences unfold. When we resist this flow, we create suffering. When we try to hold on to certainty, we create tension. But when we allow life to move as it is, something softens within us. We become more flexible, more resilient, more at ease. The Buddha taught that wisdom grows when we accept uncertainty as part of life. Uncertainty is not a problem to be solved. It is a reality to be understood. Everything changes. Nothing remains fixed. This is not something to fear. It is something to realize. Because within change, there is also possibility. Within uncertainty, there is freedom. We are not limited to a single outcome. We are not trapped in a fixed future. Life is constantly unfolding in ways we cannot fully predict, and this is what makes it alive. When we stop fearing change, we begin to move with it. We adapt. We respond. We grow. There is a quiet confidence that begins to develop, not because we know exactly what will happen, but because we trust our ability to meet whatever arises. This trust is different from control. Control tries to eliminate uncertainty. Trust accepts it. And in that acceptance, there is peace. A deep, stable peace that is not dependent on circumstances. A peace that remains even when life is uncertain. This is the peace that comes from understanding, from awareness, from letting go. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Reflection and closing, approximately 1,000 words. The Buddha observed that the human mind often suffers not because of real danger, but because of imagined futures. This insight is simple, yet deeply transformative. When we begin to look closely at our own experience, we may notice something important. Much of the fear we carry does not come from what is actually happening. It comes from what the mind is imagining. It comes from projections, from possibilities, from thoughts about what might go wrong. And because these thoughts feel real, we react to them as if they are real. We become tense. We become anxious. We become restless. But if we pause for a moment, if we step back and observe, we may begin to see that these fears are not happening in the present moment. They are happening in the mind. This realization is not meant to dismiss our experience. It is not about denying fear or pretending that everything is fine. It is about understanding the source of suffering more clearly. Because when we understand the source, we begin to loosen its hold. The Buddha did not teach that we must eliminate all thoughts. He did not teach that we must control the mind completely. Instead, he pointed toward awareness, toward seeing things as they truly are. When we observe thoughts without attachment, something subtle begins to shift. We no longer become fully absorbed in every idea that arises. We begin to recognize thoughts as temporary events. They come, they stay for a moment, and they pass. Just like clouds moving across the sky. Some clouds are light, some are dark. Some move quickly, some linger. But none of them stay forever. In the same way, thoughts do not stay forever. Even the most persistent worry will eventually fade. Even the strongest fear will change. This is the nature of the mind. It is always moving, always changing, always unfolding. And within this constant movement, there is something that remains still. There is an awareness that observes all of this. This awareness does not panic. It does not rush. It does not cling. It simply sees. When we begin to rest in this awareness, the relationship with fear changes. Fear may still arise, but it no longer controls us in the same way. We can feel it without being overwhelmed by it. We can observe it without becoming lost in it. And slowly, the intensity begins to soften. The mind becomes less reactive, more spacious, more at ease. Through mindfulness, we discover that peace does not come from eliminating thoughts. It comes from understanding their impermanent nature. It comes from seeing clearly that thoughts are not reality itself. They are experiences within the mind, temporary, changing, passing. This understanding brings a kind of freedom. We are no longer trapped inside every story the mind creates. We are no longer forced to follow every fear into the future. We begin to have a choice to return to the present, a choice to observe rather than react, a choice to rest in awareness. And in that awareness, something beautiful begins to emerge, a quiet sense of peace, not a dramatic or overwhelming peace, but a gentle, steady calm, a calm that exists beneath the surface of thoughts, a calm that does not depend on everything being perfect. This peace is always available. It is not something we need to create. It is something we begin to notice when the noise of the mind becomes quieter, when we are no longer chasing the future, when we are no longer replaying the past, when we are simply here, breathing, observing, being. Life begins to feel different. There is less pressure, less urgency, less fear. We are no longer trying to control every possible outcome. We are no longer trying to predict everything that might happen. Instead, we begin to trust the unfolding of life, moment by moment, step by step. This trust is not blind. It is grounded in understanding, an understanding that everything changes, that uncertainty is part of existence, that we do not need to know everything in order to be at peace. As this understanding deepens, the mind becomes lighter, more open, more free. We still make plans. We still take action. We still move forward in life. But we do so without the same level of fear, without the constant burden of imagined futures. We begin to live more fully in the present moment. And in doing so, we begin to experience life more directly, not through the filter of anxiety, not through the lens of fear, but as it is, simple, changing, alive. This is the essence of the Buddha's teaching, not to escape life, but to understand it, not to eliminate all uncertainty, but to find peace within it, not to control every thought, but to see thoughts clearly, without attachment. When we begin to live in this way, suffering gradually decreases, not all at once, but little by little, moment by moment, until one day, we notice something has changed. The mind is quieter, the heart is lighter, and the present moment feels enough. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Deepening the realization. And as this understanding continues to deepen, we begin to notice something even more subtle. The mind that once felt so heavy, so crowded, so restless, is no longer the same. There is more space now, more silence between thoughts, more awareness of what is happening within. And in that space, we begin to rediscover something that was always there, a quiet presence, a stillness that does not depend on circumstances. This stillness is not something we create. It is not something we force into existence. It is what remains when we stop clinging, when we stop chasing every thought, when we stop trying to control what cannot be controlled. At first, this stillness may feel unfamiliar, because the mind has been so used to movement, so used to noise, so used to constant activity. Silence can feel strange, even uncomfortable. But if we stay with it, if we allow ourselves to rest in that quiet space, something begins to change. The discomfort fades, and what remains is a gentle sense of peace. A peace that does not need explanation. A peace that does not come from solving problems, but from no longer being entangled in them. This is where true rest begins. Not the kind of rest that comes from distraction. Not the kind of rest that depends on escaping reality, but a deeper rest. A rest within awareness itself. In this state, we are no longer fighting the mind. We are no longer trying to silence it completely. We are simply allowing it to be. Thoughts may still arise, but they no longer carry the same weight. They no longer demand immediate reaction. They pass through like echoes, leaving no lasting disturbance. And gradually, we begin to trust this process. We begin to trust that we do not need to solve every thought. We do not need to answer every fear. We do not need to predict every future. Life can unfold without constant mental interference. This trust is not passive. It is deeply aware. It is a recognition that life has always been moving, even without our control. The heart continues to beat. The breath continues to flow. The world continues to turn. And within this vast movement, we are simply a part of it, not separate from it, not in control of it, but flowing with it. When we begin to see life in this way, a certain softness appears. We become less rigid, less defensive, less afraid, because we are no longer trying to hold on to something that is constantly changing. We are no longer resisting the natural movement of existence. Instead, we begin to move with it. And in that movement, there is a quiet harmony, a sense that things are unfolding as they are meant to, not according to our expectations, but according to causes and conditions beyond our full understanding. This realization does not make us careless. It makes us present, more attentive, more grounded. Because when we are not lost in the future, we are finally here, fully here, in this moment. And this moment is enough. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. This is where life is actually happening. Not in imagination, not in projection, but here, now. And when we rest in this understanding, fear begins to lose its foundation, because fear depends on uncertainty about what has not yet happened. But when we are here, there is nothing to fear in the same way. There may still be challenges. There may still be difficulties, but they are met directly, not multiplied by imagination, not amplified by endless thinking, just experienced as they are. And this changes everything. Because suffering is no longer added on top of experience. It is no longer created by resistance. It is no longer fueled by mental projection. Instead, there is a simplicity, a directness, a clarity. Life becomes less complicated, not because the world has changed, but because our relationship with it has changed. We are no longer trapped in the mind's endless stories. We are no longer carried away by every thought. We are simply aware, present, alive. And from this place, compassion begins to grow naturally, because we begin to see that others are also struggling with the same patterns, the same fears, the same mental projections, the same anxiety about the future, and instead of judgment, there is understanding. Instead of separation, there is connection. We see that this human experience is shared, that the restless mind is not personal, it is universal. And this realization softens the heart. It brings kindness, it brings patience, it brings a deeper sense of unity with others. And so, as we come to the end of this reflection, we are not left with a conclusion to hold on to. We are not given something to believe in. We are simply invited to observe, to notice, to be aware, to see the mind as it is, to recognize the nature of thoughts, to gently return to the present moment, again and again and again. There is no rush. There is no final destination. Only this continuous unfolding of awareness, moment by moment, breath by breath, and within this unfolding, peace is always available. Not somewhere in the future, but here, right now. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Namo Amitabha Buddha.